watched her hesitate, and for a moment the busy restaurant faded into silence, as if time had decided to pause and let the tension stretch longer than it should. She felt the weight of his gaze pressing into her chest, and wondered if this was some kind of test or a desperate plea that could not be ignored. The child at the corner of the table looked up and smiled softly, unaware of the invisible threads weaving tension around them, and the waitress swallowed hard, unsure if she was walking into a miracle or a trap. The father leaned closer, lowering his voice to a whisper that brushed her ear and carried a scent of expensive coffee and something indefinable. He said the event was not just any gala, it was the unveiling of a deal that would secure their future, and that he had tried everything to make it work alone. But his daughter deserved normalcy, even if for a night. She nodded slowly, but her mind raced through possibilities, each more terrifying than the last, as she imagined. A room full of strangers judging every misstep, and she felt a flutter of fear she had not felt in years. He placed a hand over hers, and the warmth made her question the strangeness of the request and the sincerity behind it. He explained that the mother she was to pretend to be was someone from his past, someone whose absence was a wound still raw but necessary to conceal. He smiled briefly and said some truths are better hidden, at least for tonight. She looked down at her shoes as if they held the answer to the puzzle, and wondered if she could trust a man whose life was so carefully constructed yet so fragile. Outside the window, the lights of the city blinked like distant stars, and a cold wind swept past, carrying the faint scent of rain. The waitress noticed a man standing across the street watching the restaurant, and her heart thumped in her chest. He disappeared before she could point him out, and she felt a chill crawl up her spine, as if the world had shifted and someone had crossed into their quiet corner with intentions unknown. She glanced at the child again and realized the weight of her decision could shape more than just a single night. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded envelope, handing it to her with a trembling hand. She opened it and found a series of instructions written in precise, neat handwriting, and a key that gleamed under the restaurant light. He said everything she needed to know was in there, including what to say where to stand and who to avoid. But he also added one line in a different handwriting that made her pulse spike and read, "Do not trust anyone, not even me." The words hovered in the air between them like smoke waiting to curl into danger. She glanced around the restaurant, seeing nothing that suggested imminent threat, but the shadows seemed darker somehow, and the people more intent on their own business than usual. He leaned back and sighed, rubbing his face as if carrying a burden too heavy for his shoulders. She realized then that this man was not merely asking a favor. He was asking her to step into a life that had rules she could not yet understand, and that the first misstep could be catastrophic. Her mind raced, imagining the gala hall filled with sparkling gowns and whispered secrets and the sound of laughter that might hide jealousy or worse, betrayal. She thought of the note and the key, and 1,000 scenarios where everything went wrong. She looked at the child, who now played quietly with her crayons, and felt a pang of protectiveness she had not expected, and wondered how she could possibly pretend to be a mother when she barely knew the man who asked. He spoke again, soft but urgent, and said the key opens a door behind the stage at the gala, and what lies beyond it is crucial to keeping the night on track. She hesitated because the implication was clear, that danger could be waiting just beyond her reach. Or worse, that someone else knew the truth and was planning to exploit it. She nodded slowly, feeling the weight of her decision press heavier on her chest than any purse or uniform ever could. As she stood to leave the restaurant, the city seemed to pulse with a hidden heartbeat, and the drizzle began to tap against the windows in a rhythm that matched the tension in her body. She tucked the note carefully into her pocket and glanced at the child again, knowing she would have to make it through the night, and the thought of stepping into a world so different from her own filled her with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. The CEO followed her to the door and whispered one last warning that made her stomach twist and her pulse quicken. He said, "Watch the shadows. They are not always empty, and someone is already watching." She stepped into the night and felt the cold rain soak her coat and press reality against her skin in a way that left no room for hesitation. She could not yet know if the night would reveal danger or opportunity, only that the First step had been taken and the game had begun with players who hid their motives behind smiles and polite nods. She glanced back once to see him disappear into the restaurant and knew that the next hour would demand courage. She did not yet know she possessed, and that pretending might be the only way to survive. The night of the gala arrived and the waitress adjusted the dress she had borrowed from a friend. It shimmered under the lights in a way that made her feel both exposed and, sirdang, invisible. She glanced around the grand hall filled with crystal chandeliers and murmuring guests and wondered if she could really step into the role of a mother she had never been. She held the child close and whispered a story to distract her from the unfamiliar faces, and the child giggled softly, unaware that the night held secrets that could unravel at any moment. The CEO appeared beside her, looking every bit the polished executive he was, and yet the lines of worry under his eyes betrayed him. He leaned down and whispered that the key she carried would guide her to a room no one else should enter, and that every smile in the hall might hide a threat. She nodded and forced a smile as they walked through the crowd, but a shiver ran down her spine when a man in a dark suit made eye contact with her for longer than politeness allowed, and she realized someone knew exactly who she was pretending to be. They reached the center of the gala where champagne flutes clinked and music swelled, and the child was swept up by other children in an area cordoned for play. She turned to check on her charge, but a sudden blackout threw the entire hall into darkness and screams echoed against the marble walls. Her heart leapt as she felt a hand grab hers, dragging her toward the side stage where the shadows pooled thick and suffocating. The CEO whispered that someone had triggered the blackout intentionally, and that every step they took from here could determine whether the night ended in triumph or disaster. She followed him behind a heavy curtain to a hidden door that matched the key in her pocket, and her hands trembled as she inserted it and turned it slowly. She could hear the panic in the hall rising behind them, and the faint sound of someone breathing heavily from the other side of the door made her freeze. He pushed it open, and they stepped into a narrow corridor lined with boxes and old props, and she realized that no one would think to look here, but that the real danger might be waiting for them inside the shadows. The CEO pulled out a small envelope from his jacket and whispered instructions about a package that had to reach the gala floor without attracting attention. She felt the weight of responsibility pressed down on her chest as he outlined the plan in hushed tones, and she wondered how a simple act of delivery had become a matter of life and death. Suddenly a sound behind them made them both spin, and they saw a figure leaning against the wall in the dim light, and she realized the blackout had given someone else the perfect cover to move unseen. The figure stepped forward, slowly revealing a face she thought she recognized but could not place immediately, and the sudden clarity that came with recognition made her stomach knot. She wanted to speak, but the CEO grabbed her arm and shook his head, signaling that silence was crucial and that any wrong word could trigger chaos. The figure smiled faintly and said a name that made her blood run cold, and she understood that the gala was not merely an event. It was a trap layered with motives hidden under etiquette and laughter. They moved along the corridor, keeping low and quiet, but the sound of footsteps echoing from the other side of the wall made her pulse hammer in her ears. She whispered a question, but the CEO did not answer. He only nodded toward a vent that led to the main hall, and she realized that crossing through it was their only chance to reach the package and protect the child from the unseen eyes that seemed to follow their every move. Her fingers brushed the cool metal, and she hesitated for a fraction of a second too long as they emerged onto the balcony overlooking the main floor. The lights flickered back on, revealing the guests frozen mid-laughter and the chaos of spilled drinks and confused murmurs. She caught sight of the man in the dark suit again and realized he was heading straight for the area where the package had to be placed. Her heart leapt, and she tightened her grip on the child who had somehow slipped behind the CEO without anyone noticing, and she understood that the night's end would depend on timing, courage, and a secret she could not yet share. The CEO whispered instructions about a hidden staircase that led directly to the gala floor, and she followed him cautiously, holding the child close while keeping an eye on the approaching threat. The footsteps were louder now, and the man in the dark suit was almost at the location where the package had to be placed. She knew they had seconds to act, and every move had to be perfect, or the entire plan would unravel, and someone could get hurt in ways she had not imagined.